Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We have been planning this day for a very long time, so it is exciting to actually be here today with everybody. If you don't already know me, my name is Tara Leach. I am one of the senior advisors who support our members on both of the charters. This panel, Navigating Tomorrow, Equality Charters in the Changing Higher Education Landscape, is part of our year-long Equality Charters celebration. As you know, Advance HE is celebrating the impact of the charters of the last 20 years. Our three celebrations coincide with Athena Swan turning 20, and both the Race Equality Charter and Athena Swan Ireland turning 10. So we have a lot to celebrate. Throughout the celebration year, you will hear from a range of people who have been involved in the charters, from developing the developing stages of Athena Swan and REC to practitioners who have worked on the charters in their institutions and departments, to senior leaders who have led and supported the work, and from those who have benefited from the frameworks. In our celebration, we aim to do a number of things. It's important to take a moment to breathe, to exhale, to take stock in the work that we have achieved, and to pat ourselves on the back. And anyone who's been in one of my midterm reviews is I always take a moment to make sure that we pat, yes, Evangie, yes, 2 weeks ago, we pat ourselves on the back for the work that we've done so far, because it's important. It has been hard work. We also want to focus on the impact the charters have had throughout higher education, the higher education sector. It is a time to highlight the progress institutions and departments have made, and the individuals whose lives have been changed. It is also essential to look forward. It's no secret that currently the higher education sector is navigating financial, social, and political challenges. As we celebrate the charters, this panel will help us think critically about the future, address the challenges we face, explore what must evolve to continue to support the sector, ensuring that higher education is an inclusive space for all, and how we can ensure the charters remain impactful in an evolving landscape. So we have an hour this morning. For today's session, we have asked each of our speakers to share their reflections on working with the charters, sharing their experiences and their reflections. We will then have a chat in conversation to explore the future of charter work, followed by an open discussion where we encourage you to share your own thoughts, your questions, and your own reflections as well. So I'm very honored to share the stage today with our speakers. With us today are Parveen Yaqoob, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Reading. Parveen was previously Chair of Athena Swan Governance Committee and is currently an Advance HE board member and Chair of the EDI Committee. We have Karishma Asher, a Race Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool. She leads the overall coordination of their REC portfolio, and including monitoring, implementation, and reporting. We have Banji Adewumi, is Director of Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion at Greenwich University. She was the institutional lead of the Race Equality Charter and Athena Swan at the University of Manchester, and also now at Greenwich. And we have Ruth Gilligan, Assistant Director for UK Equality Charters at Advance HE. She is responsible for the strategic leadership of Athena Swan and the Race Equality Charter in the UK and internationally. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the audience. Parveen, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Tara. So I thought I would take a personal approach to my introduction because I've engaged with the charters from a number of different perspectives. And the first thing I'd say is I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for the Athena Swan Charter. And that might seem like a massive exaggeration. Believe me, it's not. Let me explain. So about 10 years ago, my university decided that it wanted to get more women into senior leadership positions. And one of the ways it was going to do that was to use its institutional Athena Swan action plan to offer all of those roles as a job share without question. And that directly led to me applying for a PVC research role as a job share. I wouldn't have applied for it otherwise. And it meant that I became the first person from an ethnic minority to serve on my university executive board. And a couple of years later, the first female Deputy Vice-Chancellor in the university's 100-year history. So Athena Swan was the impetus for that. My university used its Athena Swan action plan to get women like me into senior leadership positions, and that's really what the charters are all about. A few years later, I became chair of the Athena Swan Governance Committee, and that was responsible for overseeing the transformation of the charter after the independent review in 2020. And so what it means is that the charter, in the form that it's in now, means that actions are led by member priorities, they're not prescriptive. The idea was that the charter is more streamlined and hopefully less burdensome, but also importantly, the transformation opened up the opportunity for professional, technical and operational directorates to gain Athena Swan awards in their own right. And actually Reading became not only the first university to hold an Athena Swan PTO award, but it's the only one that holds that award at silver level, which we're very proud of. Progress on race equality has always lagged behind, and Reading is no exception. For many years, there was a real discomfort about any conversation about race and racism outside the safe confines of an EDI committee. We ended up tackling that head-on with a race equality review in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and it did transform things. We then went on to get a bronze race equality charter mark, having failed previously on 2 occasions, because we put aside that discomfort and had some of those difficult conversations. So I'm now chair of the Advance HE EDI committee, and one of the things that we're working with Advance HE on is development of the holistic charter. So you might have heard it described as the inclusive institutions framework. It's been mentioned at this meeting. But there are very many other important themes that crop up as important topics for the EDI committee to be considering. How we take an increasingly intersectional approach, how we can make the charters more internationally relevant, how we navigate the increasing societal polarisation that we're facing. But for me, one of the most important things is making the business case for EDI absolutely clear. It's never been more important, and I think the 10 and 20-year milestones are a trigger for us to really do that, because I think the shift from intention to impact is going to be really important in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Parveen. Karishma?
Thank you. Not quite sure how to follow that one up, even though I've got everything written out here. So I'm the Race Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool, so I'm quite directly involved in our rec work and coordinate our application. The university got their first bronze award in January last year, so we're really excited about that as an achievement, but also what it means for our ability to actually progress our work. And I think when Tara, when you contacted us about the themes we wanted to cover today, I thought, actually, I'm going to hone in a little bit on sustaining and progressing charters work in the ongoing political landscape from the perspective of someone who is sort of doing that work day in, day out in quite a hands-on way. And before I jump in, I just want to share a few anchors that inform how I work and the reflections that I'll share today. So my background is in campaigning and student movement, and I draw a lot on campaign and behaviour change theory to underpin my work, to shape it, to sort of look at the long-term progress and how we can sustain that and build that in a really sort of long-lasting way. And so campaigning is also shaping how I view the challenges to sustaining and progressing charters work. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about data and EDI expertise and strategy to illustrate this. And I cannot stress how strange that is for me, because I'm an English literature graduate. I came into this job thinking, I don't know how to work with data. Now data informs every single piece of work that I do. For timing's sake as well, to mention this to you, Tara, I will jump straight into my reflections, but I do want to stress that it's against the backdrop of respect, of gratitude, and just genuine love and hope within the EDI practitioner community. It's so wonderful to see so many colleagues here in Newcastle and to speak with you and just learn about all the fantastic work you're doing. So in terms of data, one of the recurring challenges that I see in the institution and in others whenever we sort of communicate across different steering groups and self-assessment teams is sourcing accurate and consistent data and working with it to prioritise those issues. And that seems to be a major challenge across the sector, because the charters, I found the frameworks really require us to confront things in a way that we haven't before. That was definitely quite a sharp learning curve for us when I came into the role and started coordinating that piece of work. So I'm really glad you mentioned the business case, because that's exactly what I do in my work, to demonstrate what could go wrong, basically, if we don't do what needs to be done. And underpinning that every single time is the data sets. I rely so heavily on that data to really sort of illustrate that and to get what needs to be done over the line. One of my favourite things about Wreck and Athena Swan, and again, that's not a sentence I thought to say, but here we are. It's a very well-deserved sentence, I will stress, is that they're rooted in a union of data and principles. So award holders, by the nature of the charters, they're able to justify their action plans and associated work through the data that's collected and presented within applications. So when it comes to navigating this political landscape that we're going through at the moment, it's so crucial to lean on that framework and to show why we're doing what we're doing. I'm going to take a guess and say most of us in this room, probably outside of this room as well, are very much guided by the moral argument for EDI. We really sort of have that in our values, in the way that we work, the way that we approach each other. We see and we feel the impact of injustice and systemic oppression, and we're really driven to tackle that. I think, is that a fair thing to say about everybody here? Yeah. Good. That would be very, very sad if it wasn't. I'm sure also in this mounting political landscape, many of us can relate to different forms of backlash to what we do, whether that's freedom of information requests, that sometimes you look at the wording and you think, that's not very good faith, is it? Sort of devil's advocate arguments, whataboutisms, and just discriminatory behaviour under the guise of the free speech. I don't want to tackle it too much. But in grappling with responding to these with data and a business case, it's such a challenge, because every single fibre of me is screaming to make that moral argument. And I live with ADHD and autism, so keeping my emotions in check is hard. It's really, really difficult to really sort of keep that in line and to lean back on that data, take that measured response. But, you know, we've just found that in this mounting landscape, that is what we have to do. So while prepping for today, I realised the one challenge bigger than that, or maybe not bigger, equal to in a slightly different way, is responding to lived experience and assumed expertise. And I'm so glad that colleagues who were here last night for the awards dinner would have heard Professor Rollock discussing this in a speech as well, because it's just not a conversation I often have with other practitioners. It's not something we spend a lot of time discussing, and I think as we move forward and think about the best way to sustain and evolve charters work, it's a conversation that we should be bringing out into the forefront to really tackle and to really resolve. From a campaigning lens, the challenge I see is that we're grappling with the need to translate lived experience into an effective strategy, but then also have that robust ongoing dialogue that communicates the translation process that we've got at play, and then enables adaptations as necessary as well. So I'm sure obviously with the financial challenges, many of us have had to relook at our action plan work streams, rejig them a little bit, see what we can do with what we have. And we need to be able to have those, enable those adaptations in a way that still responds to the needs of our communities, while also facilitating, and I suppose to an extent protecting the space and the time needed for culture change strategy to actually take root and be implemented. It takes a long time. I don't think that's something that's new to anyone here. It really does take a very long time for that to really be felt at a personal level when we're dealing with institutional inequalities. So the impact of that that I see is institutional commitments are then seen as negotiable, and that may be by leaders, by key decision makers, by key sort of stakeholders in making the changes that we need to happen, but also by some with the absolute best intentions as well. So I spend quite a lot of my time defending strategic approaches to tackling inequalities that don't always align with individual lived experience, because that particular context or a particular intention it's positioned as equal to or superseding fluency in a combination of lived experience, best practice, legal requirements, strategy, and so many other skill sets combined. I think it's fairly safe to say workloads are pretty high across the sector. If anyone has time in their diaries right now, I'm very jealous of you. Please teach me your ways. So capacity is a really critical resource that we really do need to make sure we're protecting and prioritising as we move forward. And so that robust dialogue that I mentioned, we then are in a position where it's occupied with individual circumstances or individual desires to be involved. And that is, it's not always compatible with an effective cross-institution strategy. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I've been grappling with in my role. Very much so in the mounting political landscape and in the sort of, in probably the most recent year. So in protecting the future of charters work, data is more important than ever. And alongside that, we as practitioners, we need to be supported in stating ourselves as credible experts so that we can affirm our institutional commitments as a framework to operate within. I'll hand over to Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Banji Adewumi, Director Equality, Diversity, Inclusion at Greenwich, and prior to that, nearly 3 years at the University of Manchester. And to the brief, I have a few points to share with our audience, and in no particular order. One of the things I've learned is the importance of leadership and how leadership directly influences not just the pace, but the depth of what work is accomplished, be it with regards to REC or with regards to Athena Swan. And not necessarily giving specific examples. Please, many a times we might think leadership right from the very top. I assume I'm speaking to EDI leads in the room, regardless of your job title. Wherever you do find that leader, hold on to that leader. As I said, they would directly influence your reach, your depth, and the pace of the work that needs to be done. Another key learning I have gleaned from, of course, working with both the charters is identifying and choosing your SAT, as in the self-assessment team members. So, of course, not every single university may have a charter mark lead person who sits in the EDI team, and very much would rely on your SAT members. I've learned that, and being able to speak from having worked in the North and the South, I might quickly put in this sentence or message I'm going about sharing. If you're an EDI practitioner and you haven't worked in both North and South, you haven't quite cut it yet. But anyway, choosing and identifying, and I've included the word identifying because there may well be that person or those persons who wouldn't necessarily put themselves forward, and your communication stroke influencing skills will be vital in ensuring, to the point some of that my colleague has mentioned, building the capacity that isn't necessarily readily provided for you or for the institution in driving that agenda. I've worked across sectors, and not just mentioning names, but I would like to speak of a lesson I've learned from the NHS, where some of you might know it isn't necessarily that you would have a team of EDI practitioners. You may well be the one and only. Mm-hmm. And how do you build a community of champions across hospital sites, across areas? That is definitely something I've learned in this space. Another lesson I've learned is managing the narrative. And what do I mean? Please do know there are naysayers. What do I mean? Those who might question, why are you going on about gender? Why are you going on about race? And how you are able to not necessarily defend, but manage your communication plan, how you put across the need for this particular work program. Again, as one who's worked, who's worked across sectors, there could be the arguments that you need to address in terms of, you're only doing it because of grants. I understand. But how do you also explain to your audience that we do need not just the award, but the action planning to have taken place after having done the depth of the work that's involved? I want to round up with this final point, which is personal, again, similar to my colleague, managing opposition and self-care. How excited I was when Jason was speaking this morning. Because if there's anything I've learned, I speak as an EDI specialist, I would say, having worked in this space for over, nearly 3 decades, the importance of self-care. If at all anything, I've learned that in the last 4 years. And why is it important? That there is, and I repeat, that there is continuity of the work that you or colleagues have started beyond the person in that role moving to somewhere else or to another job. There's something about tokenistic approaches in certain organizations, and there's something about being heart and head involved in the work that needs to be done. But it's important that it's also recognized, the emotional labor. It's a term that's usually used for the nurses or those in the health sector, but I stand here or sit here this morning or afternoon to say it's also applicable in the EDI space. Do look after yourself, make the most of the community, the network of colleagues like-minded, and recognize that you're making a difference. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ruth.
Thank you. I'm already wowed by colleagues on the panel, to be honest. So, as Tara said, I'm Ruth. I work with the Equality Charters teams at Advance HE. And I've spent the last decade actually working with institutions across the UK and internationally to support the strategic, evidence-informed approaches to EDI that the charters support. That's included developing the Athena Swan Charter, the REC, and as Parveen mentioned, at the moment, the Inclusive Institutions Framework. And when I was thinking, I suppose, about what I could bring to this panel, I suppose I'm especially drawing on that recent development work with the Inclusive Institution Framework. As I said, I've been in the team for 11 years this year, but I also come to this work with a background in science policy and research, and just like a deep commitment, as I've seen shared across all of the conference sessions today and yesterday, to really see that sustainable and systemic change that we all want to see, that genuinely improves equity and the experience for staff and students. So I suppose as we think about the future of equality charters in what is a really rapidly changing higher education and research landscape, I suppose I wanted to start with a core belief that really echoes what Banji just said. Like, we owe it to the communities that we are serving to make sure that our EDI work is not just meaningful but sustainable, and sustainable beyond when each of us are in our roles, or sustainable beyond the action plan that we're implementing. And that means making it more efficient, more embedded, and more impactful. So over the last year, I've been deeply entrenched in the development of the Inclusive Institutions Framework, which has been shaped in partnership with institutions across the UK and globally. And at its heart, what we're trying to do is really respond to the very live challenge of how do we keep the ambition of the charters alive while making it work better for the institutions in the context that they're operating in today. Because we all know that the pressures that our institutions are under, we've talked about them a lot today and yesterday, whether that's financial, political, or cultural. And so the message that I've consistently heard in the dialogues that I've been having, the team's been having over the last 2 years, is clearly and consistently, we need help to focus, to cut duplication, to align our efforts, to do what works. And so that's really been at the core of what we're trying to build into the ongoing development of Athena Swan and REC, and into the development of the Inclusive Institution Framework. And I suppose at the heart of this, it's really a core idea, I think, about what I believe we need to grapple with as a sector when thinking about the future. Because the work we are trying to do is to help institutions do what they're already trying to do, but better. So thinking about aligning EDI with broader strategic priorities, using your evidence more effectively, like Parveen said, articulating that business case and the impact and the outcomes that our work is delivering, setting realistic and meaningful priorities, and then translating those priorities into sustained and sustainable action. But it's really easy to say that, and I suppose what I wanted to acknowledge is that it won't be easy, and it isn't easy. It does require, I think, a different way of thinking, moving from seeing EDI as a set of tasks to engage with, and more seeing it as a catalyst to deeper institutional transformation. And, the real impact, the real transformation won't come from how institutions engage with us in advanced HE, but actually it'll come from the changes institutions are making internally to how they plan, prioritise and deliver EDI work. And that shift takes courage, commitment, and often a real willingness to do things differently to how we have been doing them. And I really do have to acknowledge that that's, I don't think, not an easy thing for us to do. What does give me real hope is that we're already seeing that mindset shift, absolutely, across the kind of co-development groups that we've had running, informing the development, and in every conversation that I've had across the conference today and in the run-up to this time together, I've seen a real willingness to learn from each other, to share what works, and to build something together that's more than just a compliance exercise, but something that really drives lasting change. If you've been in the previous session, just to this, we had a case study sharing session with Charter Award holders, and we've seen that learning from each other and learning from the longitudinal evaluation of what works and what doesn't work. And I think moving forward, as we navigate the very challenging circumstances that we are facing, we do need to ask ourselves not just about what we're doing, but how and how well. And I'm really optimistic by the beginning of the conversations that are already starting here at the conference.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you to our speakers for your reflections. Just for me, listening to you, the things that just kind of stood out for me is around and some of them are threads that have been coming up throughout the conference as well, particularly around data, the importance of data, importance of using the data within the arguments and the business case that we have. That looking at EDI practitioners as skilled people. I think that's one of the most important messages that has come across from the conference over the last 2 days. The importance of leadership. We always talk about the importance of leadership, but just something around the pace, the depth, the reach. It's really important that we hold on to that. And also managing the naysayers. I recall the naysayers when I was working on REC, and that's exactly what we called them, the naysayers. And the elements of self-care, so important. And what Jason was saying this morning resonated with me, because I am also, anyone who knows me, I'm terrible at self-care. I can take care of everybody else. I am the last person to take care of myself. But I'm lucky because I have amazing colleagues who take care of me as well. And I have always appreciated that. But also thinking about how we need to be more sustainable in this work, in this space. So on that last note, I have some questions for you all. So my first question is more of a kind of taking a step back, but in a sense kind of painting a picture. What would a truly inclusive higher education sector look like, and how do you think the charters can help us to get there? Does anyone want to take on that first question?
I'm happy to have a go.
Thank you.
So you could look at this separately for students and staff, couldn't you? For students, you would want there to be accessibility without economic barriers, a higher education that was suitable for diverse needs, equal opportunity for progression, no awarding gaps for any particular group, a curriculum that was inclusive of different cultures, perspectives and histories. And I guess a lot of that is wrapped up in APPs for institutions and not necessarily something that features strongly in the charters, but you would think that there would be some overlap with what you're doing in the charters to that. On the staff side, where we often put a lot of focus, you would want diverse representation, people from a variety of backgrounds, people who are trained and confident in inclusive teaching strategies, equal opportunities for progression. And for me, a litmus test would be, does the top look roughly like the bottom? And maybe not for the whole organisation, because that would be quite challenging. But if you think about different categories of staff, if the top doesn't look like the bottom, why is that? So does that tell you something about progression in those different categories of staff? And then how might the charters help us get there? Well, action plans are supposed to be determined by organisations themselves. So I think the first step is for the organisation itself to define what a truly inclusive organisation looks like. Where does it want to be? and then the action plan has to include the steps that enables it to do that. That's really what the charters are for. They're not, the charters themselves aren't the answers, they're the tool and they're just the starting point.
That sounds like that could be our new tagline. The charters are the tool, they're not the answer, they're the tool. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to answer the question?
Okay, yeah, I'd like to add to what has been said. Again, referring to what Jason said this morning, looking to my left and looking to my right and seeing that the people who ought to be there are there. That would definitely be a visible sign. Another visible sign is where difference is valued. And I say that not just as a black person, not just as a tall person, and many other aspects of my identity not necessarily covered by the Equality Act, where you can be yourself and there isn't the need for masking or the need to conform or the need to remain silent. I say that intentionally. How can the Charter help? I'm really very pleased to hear about the work with regards to the inclusive institution framework, and that you are listening to colleagues as you develop the framework. Of course, appreciating the financial situation we're in, more funds, and something I shared at our mid-year review. Could Advance HE sponsor research and PhDs and such things that may well be the next step for many in this space. And last but not the least, what was discussed on our table in the earlier session, peer reviewing or even inviting colleagues who are in the day-to-day facing the challenges or the joys of what we do in writing journals and having them published.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to tackle, or we can move to the next question?
Yeah, happy to
Go for it. Yeah.
pop in some notes. I think this really summarises what you've both said, to be honest. The note I've written is competently adaptive, which is obviously relative to each institution's size, resourcing, but it would include a really clear priorities, strategy, robust monitoring and preparedness to meet issues that are identified. And I think that's one of the real strengths of the Charters, again, in terms of forcing us to look at things we haven't necessarily looked at before. I know in Liverpool, it's really sort of pushed us to set up very different ways of monitoring and sourcing data. It's really sort of, it's been a catalyst to reviewing how we monitor data and how we sort of split that and where it all comes in from. So I think that's a really clear tool to a really clear place that the Charters help us to get there. I can't quite picture an HE utopia where our roles as practitioners aren't needed. But I can see one where institutions have the tools and the readiness to meet barriers to inclusivity in a really pragmatic and sustainable way.
Thank you. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Envisioning that they have the tools to do the work. Thanks. Did you want to speak, or we can
I
move
think
on?
all of it's been covered. So
Okay, that's okay. Thinking of we're giving the shifting political and social landscape that we are all experiencing. What do you see as the future of the charters in the UK? In the UK, but also in the international higher education sector as well. I don't know if something you've thought about kind of the UK and abroad and further beyond as well.
I don't mind just saying this, and only because I've thought about it in my head, and it might sound flippant, but my response to that is, this one too shall pass. We've been through a number of tsunamis, or whatever language has been used, and that's where the depth of the work we're doing, I say that as a collective, there is the need to have that communicated in the way best to serve not just our audience, but those coming after us. In which case, you would see that the opposition is very much because you are impactful.
Right.
You're making a difference.
Yes, I would agree with that. I've said that many times before. Then when they come at us the hardest is because we're doing what we should be doing. Yeah. Did anyone else want to follow up?
So I'm one of those people that always looks at the best and worst case scenario. But here I see an optimistic scenario, pessimistic, and a realistic. The optimistic is where we hold really tight to our EDI values, we reinforce through self-regulation, and the sector comes together. on accountability. So that's the optimistic. The pessimistic is where the charters become sidelined, universities deprioritise EDI, and some of the progress that we've made is reversed. For me, the realistic is that we make sure that the equality charters become more flexible. They evolve to meet the changing needs of our sector, and that's potentially international as well.
Right.
Because we are seeing that internationally there is, there are different attitudes in some countries. There's a real need for fellowship and charter work. So I think it's about evolution.
Right. Thank
We
you
can't stay the same.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think that was going to be the core of my answer as well. But
Right.
I think the future of the charters does depend on their ability to evolve, and I truly think they will, because we have in the past. We have always adapted. And not always to such negative circumstances, but we've expanded the scope, the audience, the ambition of the charters over the years, and we've always done that in line with the sector and in line with what the sector needs from us. And I do think maybe I'm erring more on the optimistic side of Parveen's scenarios, but I think if we manage that evolution and respond well, I think the result will actually be a stronger and more focused and respected version of the work that we do, because we will have doubled down on our values and be able to articulate that impact in a way that is very clearly aligned with broader strategic outcomes that the sector is holding on to. So I do think there is a way to navigate this that actually makes the charters stronger, kind of clearer in purpose and stronger on impact. So I think there's a way through that we can navigate this and actually come out better.
Thank you. And I'm thinking what to ask next, because I want to ask you about how the charters work. How can institutions make a quality charter work more intersectional? So, I don't know, Ruth, you might want to speak there. But while we're doing that, while we're making the space more intersectional, ensuring that the work on race and gender isn't lost in that as well. It doesn't happen in silos. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Happy to kick that one off.
Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose I had a bit of I had a view as institutions, but then also as a rec panelist myself. So I think as institutions, I think you said this before, Parveen, as well, about ensuring our action plans speak to each other. My response sort of it does focus on Athena Swan and rec, but of course the APPs come into that as well, and that's something we do at Liverpool. We've really sort of tightly integrated the two. In terms of our rec action planning, we use the existing Athena Swan action plan as a foundation for our rec action plan, where the action themes aligned. And our next Athena Swan plan will do the same. It'll use the rec themes where they're aligned to as a foundation of the action plan, so that they're intertwined. They're still distinct, but they are intertwined. And we're looking at how we can facilitate our respective steering groups to agree collective principles, so we have a really clear scope and working, I guess, definition almost of intersectionality in relation to the charter marks at Liverpool, as they apply there. So I think as institutions, it's making sure there's real collaboration between the two steering groups, the respective steering groups, and other key areas of work that influence that as well. Possibly through that really sort of selective self-assessment team membership that you mentioned, to make sure that those key players in the sort of education spheres or even organisational development spheres are all in there to make sure it's really robust. And then as a rec panellist, that might be part of the evolution piece as well that you mentioned, Ruth, around assessing and scoring that intersectionality in applications in a really consistent and defined way. It may be unsurprising to colleagues here that I really like very clear criteria and rules and understanding. So understanding how, in the criteria, how that can be highlighted, how that can be rewarded, would be a really welcome evolution, I think. So, yeah.
Just very quickly from me, some of the points have been covered already, so I won't repeat. But I remember an example of when we had our focus group set up And the traditional way would have been have one just for race, have one for men, and da-da-da-da. And how you have the overlap and you consider disability, sexual orientation, caring responsibilities, and that, yes, the aspect of action plans speaking to each other. Yes, for instance, at Greenwich, we got the Athena first, but we're making sure we're referring to the Athena Swan action plan as we inform the REC action plan, but not forgetting that we have a Stonewall Workplace Equality Index action plan, likewise a disability confident action plan, and where are the overlaps that could be put together.
Thank you so much.
And I guess following on from that, it means that we need to rethink how we structure, resource and measure all of that equality work, because there's so much efficiency to be gained from those points of intersection. If you just think about recruitment, if you do recruitment in a truly inclusive way, then it should hit all of those action plans. You don't need separate activities.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose just add to that, Karishma, we are definitely thinking about assessment of intersectionality, so I'll definitely bring that one back to the team. I think I agree with everything colleagues on the panel have mentioned. I think there is a way of using intersectionality to further our reach and bring a greater sense of nuance, I think, to some of the conversations we're having. I absolutely agree with the kind of the practice of it, so breaking down the silos and thinking about your data. But I think it also offers us a real opportunity to listen to those whose experiences don't necessarily fit into neat categories. And one of the things that struck me, actually, calling back to another panel that I've recently seen Tara share a couple of months ago, where we had an Irish traveller man mentioning that actually the concept of intersectionality was also kind of in parallel theorised for Irish traveller women, for example, and thinking about how intersectionality can actually maybe bring more people into a conversation because you're reflecting a more nuanced and complex understanding of everyone's experience rather than necessarily kind of a neat box that a lot of our colleagues across institutions might not identify with.
Right.
So, yeah, I was just thinking that there's not just like a practice approach, but also a mindset approach that could help us in some of the kind of tough conversations we're having.
Thank you. I am going to ask you all one final question, but I'm very conscious of time. But I always end, and again, Ruth knows this, I always end asking what is hopeful for you for the sector, because we've had some big conversations here. And I'm not saying they're negative, but they're hard, the conversations about the future, and it's really hard. So if you can say in like 5 words or less, what is hopeful for you for the sector? Very quickly. I won't hold you to the 5 words, but very quickly, what's hopeful for you?
Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, in as few words as I can. Commitment beyond compliance and meaningful change. And if I can have 2 more words, collective responsibility.
Those are good words. Thank you. Karishma?
I'm going to do it with 4. Because I'm competitive like that. We celebrate each other. That gives me a lot of hope.
That's a good one, because it kind of like covers everything. Yeah. Benji?
Mine, sorry, it's a paragraph.
That's okay.
There's more, but I'm only going to read 1 paragraph with the view that we no longer remain silent. I read, silenced or silent. Silence or silent, there remains a choice. One is made and the other we must avoid. Silenced or silent, I have experienced both. Neither is any better, especially when the truth needs to be told.
Thank you very much. That's deep. Thank you.
I really wish Badgie had gone last because my answer is really cheesy. It's people. People give me hope, and I don't have it in a couple of words. But like we have seen changes in the landscapes before. In charters, we have seen incentives applied and then withdrawn. And people have still engaged with the work in a very meaningful way, and we have seen the positive outcomes of all of that work and commitment. So that does give me hope. So not just in the future of charters, but just the value of all the work we've been talking about at the conference.
that's something to be hopeful for. Thank you. We have, and thank you to our speakers for sharing with us. We've got 10 minutes, and I wanted to open the floor to you, our audience. Do we have Danny's got the roving mic, and we've got a question. I was worried no one would have a question, so thank you. If you can say which institution you're from and your name, please.
Thank you for this amazing panel. So my name is Marjorie. I'm an associate professor in ethical AI at Sheffield Hallam University. And because I work with AI, my question for you is related to what AI can do. So I was in a SAT, in Athena's One SAT for the submission from Sheffield Hallam. And when we were working with the data was pretty bad. So my question for you is related with what feeds AI, which is the data. From what my understanding, when I was working with within the SAT, is that the quality of the data and the way we are collecting the data is not up to scratch. So there are lots of gaps, at least at the time. So I wonder if it's the same in your own institutions. If yes, what can Advanced AG do to make sure that we have a standardized advice for how to collect data, how the data should be structured, so we can then really understand the situation in each place? And then maybe a second question, I'm going to be cheeky. Is there a space for artificial intelligence to support our work in really understanding the data that once it's well structured, and then making quicker changes rather than spending time looking at individual pieces of data, as I'm sure all of you had experienced before? So sorry. Thank you.
That might be one for Ruth. Ruth, I'll drop you in it.
It's a really good question, and actually, so there's going to be a whole module in the Inclusive Institutions Framework about insights and evidence review, and a lot of that is helping institutions really reflect on what data they have, what their systems are like, where there's gaps, and how to approach that. I'm not sure there is a one-size-fits-all solution to that. And in the past, we have explored things with JISC and HISA, for example, and that hasn't really come to fruition. So I think there is a lot that Advanced AG can do, and we're hoping to really embed that in the Inclusive Institution Framework, but it might be on more of a tailored approach with supporting each institution to understand its context and improve it in that regard. On the AI front, I find it really interesting because obviously, and I know it was mentioned a little bit yesterday, there are obviously there are risks and drawbacks that we are aware about from an EDI perspective to a lot of AI models. But I do think it is here to stay, and I do think we are going to need to understand how to use it appropriately and in a way that supports our work. And I see a parallel with some of the conversations happening in our colleagues in institutions running teaching, like the kind of immediate knee-jerk reaction of AI's here, so all students have to go back to in-hall exams because we can't trust them not to use AI. And now the conversations are moving more to how do we help students to understand how to use AI appropriately to scaffold their learning. And I think that's where we need to go in EDI as well, to understand the pros and cons and the limitations of AI and how to use it appropriately.
Exactly. Thank you. Did anyone else want to, or are you happy with Ruth's response?
I'm happy. I'm a novice.
I just wanted to give you the option.
Well, I've got a provocation. So are we likely to see people putting applications together and using AI to say, we want to achieve this, write me an action plan? Is that a risk?
The risk in that, I suppose, is that they do that and then there's no critical lens applied to the output.
Yeah.
That's the risk.
Yeah.
But people are probably already doing that. Yeah. Students are doing that with essays. I think what we need to make sure is that colleagues have enough understanding of their issues and understanding of some of those key skills that we know are essential in kind of EDI practice, that they can review the output of that AI exercise and understand what's nonsense and what's appropriate for their context.
Yeah.
In the same way that we ask people to look to other examples of action plans in institutions, but always bear in mind that you'll need to contextualise it for your own institution.
And you'll need to deliver it.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's a great panel. I knew it would be. So my question is related to the celebration of the charters that was mentioned at the beginning. So within universities, there's probably, over time, been a greater focus on EDI than probably any other sector. Okay. And my question is, why have we not seen more progress if you think about the amount of effort, resources that have gone in? By what I mean there is, what is it within systems of academic institutions that mean the inclusive universities that Parveen talks about still seem such a long way off?
I'm glad I'm the chair and I'm not answering that question, because you might not get the most professional response. So I'm going to turn over to my speakers, please.
I could actually refer to something Jason said in his amazing plenary this morning. He talked about academia fostering individualism and that sort of sense of personal ambition. And I can't help thinking that that's something to do with it, because one of the challenges we have is trying to foster a culture of collective responsibility, which is what you need for a culture that supports equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think that might perhaps be at the heart of it, because in the corporate world, you're right, we've seen lots of evidence that driving gender and ethnic diversity means that those areas perform better, that there's good evidence of that. And I can't help thinking that it goes back to what Jason said this morning about that sense of individualism and personal ambition.
Thank you. Do you want to add?
Okay, and
Banji?
yeah, briefly from myself, yeah, it's a good question to ask, and the answer is why. The question why? But not to beat ourselves too much, I want to say across sectors there is this same challenge. However, I remain hopeful that HE, a higher education sector, is best placed to solve the problem, and the challenges we're facing now are even an impetus to get us moving even faster. With the number of staff we have as a collective and the millions of students coming through our doors from every nation across the face of the earth, how can we equip them to be inclusive leaders?
Thank you. I think we've got time. We've got time for, you were next, absolutely. And then maybe one other question.
I think during the whole session we have talked about the sustain. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah. It's just quiet, but it's okay.
It's my voice, sorry. We have talked about the sustainability of the EDA work. We have talked about how we can use intersectionality to fit into that sustainability and the feasibility of doing that. But my question is there any space within the charters to develop a kind of an action or an initiative required within the chapters to enhance collaboration and shared learning between institutions? And I wonder, some of the things that I have learned from Atenas One has also been from my colleagues at Queen's University. When they say, look, we put our submission in this way, and I say, can I use the template? Or we put this action because actually our data is telling us that this is the direction we should go. And then I reflect back, well, we have this an issue. So where is the space within the charters for that shared learning and collaboration?
I think there is. I think there is a little bit of a challenge, I think, in how the charters are structured as awards for individual institutions and departments. But you're right that the peer learning and collaboration does happen even within that. One of the aspects that, the kind of core aspects of the so-called suite of support that we'll be delivering alongside the Inclusive Institution Framework is going to be a new Impact Awards scheme. And actually we're going to, so that scheme is going to be focused not on a unit, a department or institution, but on a case study of impactful activity. And what we are encouraging is collaboration, cross-discipline work. So really kind of recognising and supporting where things work. And so we are trying to encourage that kind of collaboration in a more explicit way moving forward.
Thank you. We can take one final question, because it is time, but I'm going to squeeze in one final question, because Tina, you've had your hand.
Who am I going to?
On the left.
Completing ours, thank you.
And then we have to run. I can smell the food.
Hi, I'm Tina from Nottingham Trent University. I've just got a question following on impact. So I've written it down. What are the most effective methods for measuring the impact of training initiatives on institutional culture and inclusivity? How can we ensure these measures are both qualitative and quantitative? Sorry, 2 questions.
Just very quickly from me, my answer was going to be make sure you collect qualitative and quantitative, which you've already answered, and that, of course, is diverse in its own sense. So that's briefly from myself.
And my tip would be make sure that you know what your baseline is, because sometimes you're so enthusiastic about getting started that you're halfway through and then you realise you haven't captured where you started from. So it's really important to be able to demonstrate the trajectory and the journey and therefore understanding where it is you're starting from and where you want to get to.
I think my answer is probably a little bit less helpful, which is that measuring impact is really hard. And it's really hard in a complex environment like a university or a research institute where you are implementing an activity in a very complex environment. What I would say is make sure that you understand what you're trying to do when you begin, so really have really clear objectives, and then the real importance of ongoing evaluation. There are a lot of way more detailed resources that you can find, both in terms of Advanced AG, but also other agencies like TASO, for example. And again, we will hopefully, and there are tools and frameworks that you can use, like theory of change and other ways that you can really think through what you're trying to achieve and the steps that you can move through to get there. But I suppose, I guess I just wanted to put it out there that it's not easy.
Right.
So if you're struggling with it, that makes sense. But I do think that is part of what we need to do more of as a sector going forward.
Thank you.
If I could jump in really quickly, just to echo theory of change, because I use that so much. And whenever I train colleagues on it in departments, you can just see they sort of...
Yeah.
The light bulb moment?
Yeah. It really is transformational to do a theory of change exercise in anything that you're planning.
Thank you. That is all we have time for. I just wanted to take one final second to thank our speakers. It has been delightful to have you on the stage. Thank you for your reflections and your energy as well. And thank you to the audience. You've been amazing. And your questions have been very thought-provoking. And I believe it is lunchtime now. Because I can smell food. Thank you.